Welcome to the Post-Capitalist Workplace Podcast, hosted by Anuradha, a leading accessibility strategist supporting organizations of today to become organizations of the future. In Season 1, we'll explore what accessibility truly means at its core, as well as the crucial role it plays in decolonizing organizations. While Season 2 spotlights real-world examples of impactful accessibility initiatives and why they are key to addressing some of society's biggest challenges. And I want to share the 6 areas we help organizations focus on. So if you're not sure, hey, where do I start? The 6/7 areas, the first places are DEI foundations. A lot of organizations say they want to do racial justice, or they want to create a more accessible workplace, or they really want to make things easier for their guests or their customers. Fabulous. But they don't have time in their budget. They don't have money in their budget. They are not regularly making time. They're not tracking anything. So do you have time to do this? Do you know what metrics you're looking for? Are you actually making time to regularly bring this up at your meetings, to actually do some learning and not just taking a training, but then translating that training into work and lived experience? These are really important questions you want to think about. The next area would be your core identity. Generally, with nonprofits, we already know what our values are. We probably have our mission statement together, and that's fabulous. But the part that what I often see is the part where we're thinking about racial justice or disability advocacy. We've not included those aims in that core identity, and we see it as a separate topic. In fact, that siloing causes a lot of headaches. So it's important to integrate those aims into your strategy, into your vision, and translate that into these other areas I'm going to mention. Thinking about your culture and people. What does your organization do? Are you communicating that with people? Is your organization one where you're open to feedback? This is what the culture and people, thinking about your hiring processes or your recruitment practices. What are your benefits, right? This is all under culture and people. So really thinking about those things. Then there's the internal communications. That can be your own internal policies, your style guides. A lot of people say, oh, style guides, that seems weird. But a style guide is an accessibility tool, 100%. Because what I've seen so many times is X person wants to do this department does that. We don't have the same thing. And then people who are implementing are stuck in the middle because one person wants it done this way, another person wants it done this way, and it's not in an accessible format. We don't have a universal way we communicate our accessibility and the way we present ourselves and communicate in the world. So this could be your written strategy and so on. Then your operations. Operations is the heart of an organization. Oftentimes, the policies, the processes that you use, are those stored in an accessible place? Do people know what to do? A lot of times people might not need access to your back end. So then do they have the documents they need to hand? Especially when people who are doing more frontline work, they might not have access to a device at their station. Can they still do their job in an accessible way, right? Are we thinking about their building? Are your grounds accessible? Is your building accessible, right? So all these things fall under operations by and large. Then we think about the outward facing communication, sales, marketing, fundraising. You would not believe how many organizations it's very difficult to find how to donate money to them. So that's a really important thing, or we're not communicating the value of what we're providing in a way that makes sense to people. 96% of websites or homepages are inaccessible. So that's going to make doing any sort of nonprofit work or organization work really difficult because you can't communicate what you're doing with an inaccessible website. And then finally, and one of the things I think is most important, is community and outreach. Are you creating connections in your sector, in your area? Are you pushing for change on a bigger scale? This can be corporate social responsibility. This could be volunteering schemes. So people at your workplace can go volunteer somewhere else. Could be continuing education. It could be so many things that could really impact people in the community. It could be taking a stand for something and improving things. Like I've seen organizations like Lyft giving people rides to vote, right? That makes a lot of sense. If that's something you believe in, putting some of your resources behind that to support the community in some way, or giving to a specific organization. These are all parts of corporate social responsibility. So those are some areas of places you might want to start exploring. What I want to end with is historically, unions have pushed for change over the last few hundred years. And we're at a time where unions, especially in a UK or US context, are historically low, the number of people who have joined them for a number of reasons, including government stripping a lot of power away from them. So they don't have as much power. But I want you to think of all those operations, all those safety things that we have. Those are all things written in blood. Someone died to make those changes. And that forced the company or organization to do things differently. So those movements matter a great deal. And the downside, of course, is a lot of these industrial actions are not accessible. So they are not intersectional in their approach, but it's something. And it's something we need to take quite seriously, in my opinion. A lot of other rights we've gained are from women's rights or disability activists. Like in the UK, the reason transportation now has a ramp and so on to allow people with wheelchair users is because they literally chained themselves to the undercarriages of buses. Wheelchair users did that so they could be accepted onto buses. Now it's a standard feature. That happened because disability activists put their life on the line. IDEA, which is the laws that supported disabled children to be educated in the schools, happened in my lifetime in the 90s. This was just coming into being. And that happened because disability activists taking a stand, literally crawling up the steps of the Capitol building in the US to pass the ADA and the IDEA. So this stuff is emergent and we have to keep pushing. And that's the hard work. So we don't need to go invent this stuff. We can look directly at people on the ground and listen to them, these lived experience experts, and the people who are using our services, our stakeholders, and really taking their opinions on board. We need these movements to be accessible. And a lot of times, besides them not being intersectional, meaning they'll focus on race but not gender, they'll focus on disability but not race, or, we see these kind of patchwork quilt of different types of movements not always overlapping in their approach, is most of these support mostly organizations, and generally these movements are focused on individuals in the global north at the expense of people in the global south, or of the global majority. So that means we're still needing to exploit people in the global south, their resources and their knowledge making and so on, in the hopes of getting freedom for more privileged people in the global north and dehumanizing people in the global majority. So this equitability, meaning if we advocate for fair wage here, we should advocate for the same living wage there, not an equivalency. But if we're paying someone 20 pounds an hour here, then someone in the global south should get the same payment, same benefits, or comparable, depending on what makes sense. But it's not that they should get a few dollars to 20 pounds, right? It shouldn't be drastically different, is what I'm trying to say. There needs to be equivalencies. And same with our entire supply chains. There was a study that recently came out that basically said provisioning decent living standards for 8.5 billion people would require only 30% of current global resources and energy use, leaving a substantial surplus for additional consumption public luxury, scientific advancement, and other social investments. And this is a quote from basically a study that determined 8 billion of us could be easily housed and fed with only 30% of global labor and resource output that we currently have. And the paper is called How Much Growth is Required to Achieve Good Lives for All? Insights from a Need-Based Analysis. I'll link that in the comments. But as you can see, a lot of the work we're doing in the world and the resources and the labor people are doing is not commensurate with what they are earning. It's not meeting many people's needs. Our workplaces can meet our needs. The bottom line is the post-capitalist workplace needs to be re-envisioned so we can meet our needs, so we can work a fraction of the time, make sure all of our needs are met, and that there is plenty of time not only for self-care, not in the weird way capitalism has twisted that word, but actually for rest and reflection and time for all of us to give back to the community and for us to value that giving back to community and coming back to local decision-making and local governance. This is really part of the way that I would love to see the world, where people get to be delighted and lit up when they show up to work, where people who are disabled get to go into places and not feel excluded, not feel like they're getting a less than experience, where they have barriers to show up and do their work. As I said previously, so many homepages are inaccessible. So that means as a user of that web page, a customer, if they're disabled, then they're disabled and their tech, their access is blocked. That's not a delightful experience. So they would feel included. They would feel delighted. Not only would their tech work on it, they feel surprised. They feel excited. They feel happy that people who have limited capacity can still contribute to the workplace in positive ways and contribute in their world, and they are compensated for that. And all of us could have a little bit more time off to do things that we truly enjoy, including things like rest and not being run ragged through working 50, 60 years of our lives and then having a meager retirement, and disabled people not having to necessarily live on a disability allowance that doesn't cover all their needs and the additional expenses they might have because they are disabled. But also in countries like the US, that means they don't have access to health care, and if they get married, they lose their disability benefit. That is not a post-capitalist workplace I want to be a part of. And we rarely see disabled people in workplaces because that's not the standard. And yet it could be, because disabled people would easily bring perspectives that are useful to us all in our workplace. And as we make space for them, we make space for all of us, because whether or not we like it, we are all temporarily able-bodied. Something might happen at any time. That's not our fault. And we still want to be taken care of and still have a good life. So my call to action for you is, what are you going to do with this information? How are you going to reimagine your workplace? In the next episode, I'm going to share some in-depth case studies of organizations I've worked with to talk about how did they face the challenges and what direction are they taking things. Maybe you can draw some inspiration from there. And then, just like we talked about the post-capitalist workplace, but before that, we talked about what's really wrong in the workplace, what barriers exist. We're going to talk about, as a consumer, as a guest, how can we serve these customers by removing some of the barriers to their access and to their delight. And in doing so, create more equitable places where we are redistributing wealth and addressing historical gaps where some people have had and others have not had. How can we seriously address that and leave the place better than we found it? So those are the next couple episodes. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with me today, and I will see you next time. Okay, I'm recording this after episode 6. What did you think? I'd really love to hear what you think. This has taken a work of heart, and I don't think I love the idea always of putting myself out there in this format and not necessarily getting feedback. So I want to open up a channel If you want to get in touch with me and tell me, I want you to feel free to do that. And I also wanted to get my ideas across because I don't always have the platform to do that. What I'm trying to share is a very nuanced perspective of what's working and how we can reimagine our workplaces. So throughout this series so far, what is your takeaway? What one area do you want to work on right now? And what steps are you going to start to take? Because all of this is mental action if we're not actually following through and integrating it into our day, meaning if we think this is so important, there needs to be time on our everyday situations, like what's happening in a meeting. Are we bringing accessibility into that meeting? Are we showing accessibility in different ways on our website? When we're hiring and recruiting, are we bringing accessibility and that into our workplace? Those are the things that really, that's where the rubber meets the road of actually taking action. And sometimes we might look at this like, an old photo, and we might inwardly cringe like, oh, did I say that? Did I look like that? Like, I don't like the record sound of my voice sometimes, right? And we might cringe and say, oh, wow, that's not good. And then we might sometimes get overwhelmed and say, I don't know where to start, and then give up, and then kind of bring it up again in 6 months. Someone says something happens in the news again, and we want to pick it up again. Instead of doing that, let's actually take some action. And that takes a lot of courage. It's one of my brand values of courage. So I support your courageous attempts to look at yourself in all of this. How are you contributing to the problem? And how do you want to rewrite that so you can be part of the solution and create something new? That's what I'm rooting for. And I'm hoping I'm putting this out into the world, and people who are receiving it are taking this and running with it. All right. So I'll see you in the next episode where we're going to look at some case studies, and then we're going to look at what happens when we're interacting with organizations that have inaccessible practices when we are a consumer or a guest or a volunteer. What happens when that happens? Because I'll tell you, the systems aren't nearly as accessible as we want them to be. As I mentioned in this episode, 96% of homepages are inaccessible. That makes a lot of people who use Accessible Kit unable to use their website. So we have about 16% of the world's population, according to the World Health Organization, about 1 billion people with a disability of some form. And I would estimate that that could probably be higher. And when we're leaving that on the table, we're leaving the $8 trillion disabled individuals bring. So that means we're not only leaving them behind, we're not getting the compensation. We're not being paid for that. And the point is not, let me just jerry rig something so we can get that money. That is not what I'm saying. But how can we be differently so then people feel safe and psychologically safe and feel included in the process, so they want to work with us, so they tell all their friends. So they say, I have such loyalty to you and the way you work, because I know I'm seen and I'm taken care of and my needs are met. That's what I hope for all of you. Or for us to take a stand and say, you know what, I can't serve all these populations, but I can do my best and support the people who are already in the room right now. And I can create a plan to better support everyone else, because whether or not we like it, it's the law. So we need to be taking care of people. And while I think the laws are, whatever the laws are, they're going to change depending on who's in office and what's happening politically, we can do better than the law oftentimes. But that's the bare minimum. And we need to be doing that. And then so many organizations don't even have that bare minimum in place. So we can do better. And the impact that has is amazing. And there are some fun ways to create that joy and accessibility. It's not just like, oh, I put an alt tag on an image. This can be like creating our whole experience so people get a lot of joy out of it. So they're excited. That's what I would love for the people who come interact with your organization in some way. All right. So I'll see you in the next episode with some case studies. Thanks so much for your time. Thank you for joining me on today's episode. Let's connect and continue the discussion on our website.